Hello everyone, welcome back to TV Spoilers. Abby may be experiencing a mental breakdown as they discover that a son is facing internal death.
Young and the Restless reveal that Genoa City has weathered its share of storms, but nothing carries the same brutal, freezing silence as the moment the news about Dominic spreads. A child and emblem of fragile hope that Abby and Devon fought too hard to protect suddenly becomes the epicenter of a tragedy no one can fully comprehend in time. The loss doesn't arrive as a single blow and then end. It expands, seeping into every corner of every home, into every street, into every glance exchanged by people who once believed that if you loved hard enough, you could save what mattered. Dominic isn't only Abby and Devon's child. He is a heartbeat that kept a family stitched together, a promise that after so much ruin, something could still be rebuilt. So when Dominic dies after Mariah's abduction, the city doesn't simply mourn, it is dragged into a deeper pit of panic, suspicion, and guilt, where no one is sure anymore whether they're standing on truth or merely clinging to a story that helps them survive the day. For Abby, grief has no stable shape because it keeps changing faces. Sometimes it is numbness so complete she sits unmoving, eyes open yet seeing nothing, as if her body persists only because it hasn't caught up to the fact that a piece of her soul has been ripped out. Other times it is a violent surge that doesn't need words to make a room suffocate, because everything in her is screaming, if she loved Dominic this much, how did she still lose him? If she was this vigilant, how did she fail to hear danger coming? Devon is no better, but his pain is heavier, denser, like a sentence he has already handed down to himself. He doesn't only lose a child, he loses the belief that he can protect anything pure in a town built on schemes. He replays every decision like a detective reviewing evidence of a crime, hunting for the precise moment he failed, the sign he missed, and the more he searches, the more he drowns in the certainty that Dominic may have been pulled into the adult's game long before the boy even knew what the world was. Meanwhile, what begins as a case labeled kidnapping and missing person shifts rapidly into something darker. Detective Burrow enters the investigation not just as a man chasing facts, but as someone trying to keep facts from being twisted by emotion, by influence, and by stories designed to shield people who can hide their hands behind wealth. At first, the situation can be explained as a chain of mistakes, a breakdown, an act of desperation by someone spiraling into severe mental instability. But Dominic's death makes any comforting accident theory impossible to accept. When a child dies in the wake of an abduction, the city loses the right to innocence. It becomes a homicide case, whether the killer laid hands on the victim or merely pulled strings from the dark. Burrow senses that shift with the instincts of someone who has seen too many tragedies to believe in coincidence. He studies Mariah and the splintered state of a mind that has been cracked open by fear, pressure, and a toxic voice whispering that she is doing the right thing. Mariah does not move like a cold mastermind. She moves like someone being steered, hypnotized by a warped certainty that salvation lies in obeying advice from someone she trusts. The most terrifying part isn't only what Mariah did, it's that she continues clinging to the illusion even after everything collapses, as if reality is too cruel. So her mind chooses a different narrative, one where Dominic didn't die because of a crime, one where she isn't the instrument of catastrophe, one where she is simply misunderstood. Tessa stands on the edge of that abyss, staring down at Mariah while feeling herself dragged in as well. She is not only forced to face the truth that the woman she loves is psychologically unwell, she has to wrestle with the sensation of being betrayed by reality itself. Tessa believed in Mariah the way people believe in the last solid thing in a collapsing world. Now every memory between them is coated in poison, because Tessa cannot stop wondering, how many moments did Mariah stop being Mariah and become a puppet performing as a lover, a friend, a family member, while someone else held the strings? Tessa's compassion suffocates her, but there is fear in her, too, a fear she can barely admit. Not because Mariah is deliberately cruel, but because Mariah has become an open door for cruelty to walk through. Burrow starts assembling the evidence through that lens. If Mariah is a tool, who is holding the tool? If those suggestions were powerful enough to bend her moral compass until she believed kidnapping was justified, then the voice behind them had to be close, persistent, and intimately knowledgeable, someone who understood precisely how to slip into Mariah's deepest cracks. Then the evidence appears. It isn't loud, but it cuts like a blade. Indicators that Ian Ward is not merely a name used to explain hallucinations or nightmares. For a long time, Ian was treated as a ghost, an illusion, a convenient explanation for the breakdown of a fragile mind. Now concrete, chilling clues prove the opposite. Ian is alive. Ian is present. Ian didn't just survive, he hid patiently, like a predator who knows time is his greatest ally. That truth changes the entire case. This is no longer simply the story of a woman losing control. It becomes the story of a professional manipulator who can plant ideas in a victim's mind the way someone plants poison in soil, waiting for it to bloom into disaster. Burrow reviews Mariah's behavior not to excuse it, but to understand the mechanism. In a state of severe mental instability, Mariah cannot reliably distinguish truth from suggestion. When Ian feeds her warped narratives of right and wrong, saving and punishing, he doesn't need direct violence. He only needs to make her believe violence is necessary. He dresses crime in the costume of righteousness, and Mariah, confused, terrified, turns herself into the instrument that enacts it. But Ian's purpose goes beyond shattering one family. More evidence follows, opening a deeper layer that forces even Burrow to move with caution. The pattern suggests Dominic, unconsciously, was only a pawn. His death is the shot fired straight through Abby and Devon's hearts, but for Ian it may also be the spark designed to ignite something larger. Ian doesn't only want Mariah to collapse, and he doesn't only want Abby and Devon to break. He is targeting another powerful family in Genoa City, one whose name carries influence heavy enough to make people hesitate before putting it in an official report. And the most chilling part is that this connection isn't random. That family is tied to Ian's dark past, to old wounds and buried hatreds that were never properly buried at all. Dominic is pulled into the plan because he sits at a crossroads of identities, histories, and secrets the adults believe they had locked away. When a child dies, a city grieves. But when people begin to suspect that death was calculated as the first move in a revenge campaign designed to topple an entire structure of power, Genoa City stops grieving and starts shrinking inward. Whispers spread in clubs and hallways and private rooms that used to feel safe. People look at one another like knives might be hidden behind smiles. Families that once controlled their own narratives suddenly realize someone outside their circle is rewriting the script in blood. In that darkness, Abby and Devon are not only victims, they are the doorway into something bigger. Abby senses it in the raw, primal way a mother senses danger even after it's too late. She doesn't need to read the case file to feel that something larger is approaching. She sees it in Burrow's face, in the careful way he chooses his words, in the way people around her go quiet when certain names are mentioned. And that realization makes Abby both terrified and furious. Terrified because Dominic has been used, and furious because no one has the right to turn her child into a lever for vengeance. Her grief stops being purely sorrow, it becomes sharpened by rage. She may be broken, but she refuses to break quietly. She wants to know who dared place Dominic on a chessboard. She wants to see the face of the person who believed a mother's anguish is an acceptable cost. Devon is pulled into a different internal war. He wants to smash everything because the pain is unbearable, yet he fears that losing control would hand Ian exactly what he wants to devastated parents made desperate, reckless, easy to manipulate. Devon understands how power can bury crimes, and he understands how hatred can transform people into what they despise. He watches Abby and sees a fire in her that could warm or destroy. He wants to protect her from that fire, yet he cannot extinguish it because he is burning too. Dominic's death forces Devon toward a choice: drown in grief until he becomes helpless, or stand up even though every step forward feels like walking on broken glass. Mariah, meanwhile, moves through the aftermath like someone half alive. She cannot be framed as a monster, yet the horror remains. She is trapped where guilt and illusion twist together like barbed wire. A part of her senses the catastrophe, but that part is crushed under the weight of the voice that has taken root. Ian convinces her he understands her better than anyone, that he is her only compass in the storm. When the world turns away in disgust, that isolation only strengthens his hold, like poison wrapped in sweetness. The more she hurts, the more she wants to swallow the lie that numbs her. Tessa watches Mariah and sees someone both tragic and dangerous in the most heartbreaking way. She hates Ian, his cold precision, his ability to turn love into a noose. Yet she also hates herself for the moments she wants to run, to escape, just to breathe. Then she is yanked back by memory, the version of Mariah who was gentle, sincere, and real. Tessa can't shake the belief that if anyone can pull Mariah back from the edge, it has to be her. She lives between two extremes, compassion and self-preservation. And each day isn't recovery, it's a daily decision, made again and again, not to abandon the person she loves to the monster who is feeding on her mind. Burrow digs deeper, and with every layer of truth, Genoa City grows darker. If Ian is targeting another powerful family, then was Dominic a warning shot or bait? If Ian is willing to use a child's death as leverage, then what he is willing to do next may exceed any moral boundary. Burrow realizes this is no longer an investigation that can be handled like an ordinary case file. It is a race against a mind that treats cruelty as craft. And in that race, Burrow isn't only gathering evidence, he is chasing time. Every hour Ian remains free is another hour he can push Mariah further, crush Abby and Devon more completely, and move his revenge plan closer to its final strike. The most haunting truth isn't only that Ian is alive. The most haunting truth is that he is alive with purpose. That purpose has been sharpened by hatred, fed by memory, and engineered with a patient, sick devotion. The link between Ian and that powerful family begins to show like fractures in glass, at first tiny and easy to miss, but once seen, impossible to ignore because you know the whole surface is going to shatter. Burrow notices it in the way certain people tense up, in the way doors close faster, in the way meetings become quieter and more private. Genoa City is being forced to remember that power is not invincible armor, and the past never truly dies if someone is determined to dig it up. Abby and Devon, in the center of their grief, feel that pressure too. They have been pulled into a vortex they never asked to enter. Dominic, innocent and unaware, has become a knot in a story that is still unfolding. And that makes their mourning feel endless. How do you move forward when your loss is a piece of someone else's strategy? How do you rest when you know your child's death may have been calculated as a first step, not an end? Tessa grows increasingly certain that this is not merely the aftermath of mental illness, it is the product of deliberate, methodical manipulation. She sees moments in Mariah where something seems to jerk her off course, where her eyes drift as if she's listening to a voice no one else can hear. Tessa doesn't need physical proof to believe Ian has been there, inside Mariah's darkness, touching the deepest fears and bending them into weapons. And that thought terrifies her in a broader way. If Ian can do this to Mariah, he can do it to anyone who is weakened by grief, pressure, or isolation. Genoa City is filled with people like that. Dominic's tragedy doesn't only leave a grave, it leaves a hole in the city's defenses. A confrontation with Ian becomes inevitable. No one needs to say it aloud. Everyone can feel it coming like a charged storm. Abby refuses to be a woman who only weeps and waits for justice to arrive. Devon refuses to remain passive in a game his child died inside. Burrow cannot allow this to become a closed file while the mastermind still breathes. Tessa cannot survive the thought of Mariah or remaining Ian's captive forever. And Mariah, even in her instability, stands on the edge of a moment that will decide her fate. Either she continues to cling to the advice that drags her deeper into ruin, or some flicker of clarity breaks through the false narrative Ian built in her mind. All of it creates an atmosphere so tense it feels like the city is holding its breath. Dominic is gone, but his death doesn't close the story, it opens it. It opens an investigation that now resembles a hunt. It opens grief that hardens into determination. It opens the reality that Ian Ward is not a ghost but a living hand guiding disaster from the shadows. And as the connection between Ian and that powerful family sharpens, Genoa City begins to understand they aren't facing a single villain, they're facing a revenge campaign that has been brewing in darkness long enough to become something you cannot extinguish with apologies or compromises. Late one night, while Burrow organizes the final pieces of evidence from the day, he sees a line that had been buried beneath emotional noise and public outrage. It isn't a new twist added for shock, it is the convergence of what has already been revealed. Dominic as an unconscious pawn, Ian alive and manipulating from the shadows, Mariah trapped in a severe psychological spiral, and the true target being another powerful family tied to Ian's darkest past. Burrow feels it with a cold certainty. They are standing at the threshold where rumor will become a name, where why will turn into who. And in that same moment, while Abby and Devon are still drowning, while Tessa is still trying to keep Mariah from slipping further, Burrow recognizes something even worse. If they move one step too slowly, Ian will move one step first. And Ian's next move won't need Dominic as bait anymore, because he now has something more powerful, an explosive secret capable of burning all of Genoa City if released at precisely the right time. Burrow closes the file, his eyes darkening, because he knows tomorrow won't be another day of routine investigation. Tomorrow will be the day that powerful family's name may finally be dragged into the light, and the day Ian Ward may strike first, before anyone can reach him. Genoa City has witnessed its share of devastating falls, ruthless breakups, and secrets dragged into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. But some losses exist beyond any normal measure because they don't merely take a life. They steal the meaning behind everything people have fought to hold on to. For Abby, the moment the truth about Dominic becomes undeniable feels like a cold blade slicing into the deepest core of her motherhood, where hope once lived as a tiny, stubborn light she was willing to deceive herself into believing still existed. Her son's death doesn't arrive like an ending. It arrives like a life sentence with no release date. Every breath afterward becomes a question of why. Every morning becomes a fresh realization that the truth is still there, unchanged, unsoftened, unmoved, offering her no chance to get used to it. Abby doesn't simply grieve, she spirals into a genuine mental crisis because her mind can't find any solid ground when the unthinkable has happened. Her pain takes the shape of numbness so severe her body turns rigid, and then, without warning, it transforms into relentless surges of panic where every memory of Dominic becomes a knife twisting deeper. His laughter, the scent of him, the unconscious touch of his tiny hand. The rare moments of peace she once believed she deserved after so many storms. She stands inside the familiar walls of home and feels exiled to a different world, one where every object remains, yet the meaning has been drained out of it, and silence isn't calm at all, but the soundless scream of a mother whose soul has been ripped away. Devon is crushed too, but in a different way, heavier, deeper, like a stone sinking through a bottomless abyss. He carries the grief of a father who has lost his child, but he also bears the constant self-conviction of a man who has always believed he should be able to control outcomes. Losing Dominic doesn't only mean losing a child. It means losing the faith that he can protect anything good from the world's cruelty. His thoughts loop around the same axis. If he had been more alert, more relentless, if he had seen the signs sooner, would anything have changed? And that kind of question becomes its own slow execution, because it turns grief into a cycle of self-torture with no exit. Abby and Devon stand near each other, yet they feel stranded on separate cliffs, Abby drowning in panic and psychological collapse. Devon frozen in simmering rage and a sense of responsibility he can't wash off. They hurt together, but the difference in how they hurt makes it easier for them to lose each other inside the tragedy. And that isolation deepens the sense that Genoa City is watching two people gradually being pulled out of ordinary life. In the midst of this suffocating mourning, the investigation can't settle for simple explanations. Once Dominic's death becomes the point of no return, any attempt to soften it into an accident or to bury everything under the label of mental instability becomes a form of moral cowardice. The case shifts into a harsher truth. This isn't merely a chain of mistakes. It is a catastrophe with fingerprints and outcome, with motive, with intent, with someone arranging the pieces. The emerging evidence points towards something chilling. Ian isn't just a name haunting someone's breakdown or a shadow living inside Mariah's fractured perceptions. He exists like darkness, with willpower alive, purposeful, strategic. And as the curtain begins to lift, the most terrifying revelation isn't only that Ian can still manipulate people, but that he is executing a larger revenge scheme aimed at another powerful family in Genoa City. Dominic, in the innocence of childhood, becomes an unconscious victim upon placed on the board, not because he deserved relevance, but because he stood in the exact position Ian needed to create the most irreversible wound. That truth gives the tragedy a more vicious depth. If Dominic is a pawn, then his death isn't only Abby and Devon's loss, it is a message, an opening strike, a calculated wound designed to shake the foundations of people Ian truly wants to destroy. The powerful family at the center of his scheme is tied to Ian's dark past in a way that doesn't need dialogue to feel rotten, old bits of the soul, buried injuries, unresolved losses that Ian never allowed to settle into silence. That connection turns Dominic into a perfect target in the sick logic of revenge, an innocent child, but one whose death can inflict pain that never heals. A loss so enormous it can unleash chaos and destabilize the strongest families. Seen through that lens, Genoa City begins to understand this isn't only a personal tragedy. It is the first lightning strike in a storm someone is steering from the shadows. At the heart of that storm, Tessa is forced to live in constant emotional warfare. She doesn't only witness Abby and Devon being shattered, she must also fight her own sense of betrayal and fear as she confronts the alarming state of Mariah's mind. Tessa loves Mariah, and that love doesn't vanish because Mariah is unstable. It becomes more painful. Because loving someone who is being manipulated means watching them slip away without being able to pull them back with ordinary tenderness. Tessa is trapped in a cruel position. If she trusts Mariah completely, she risks ignoring the danger. If she doubts her, she feels like she's stabbing the person she loves. In her mind, Mariah is both the one she wants to protect and the door the darkness has walked through. That reality keeps Tessa living on exhausted alertness, where even the smallest sign can become a warning bell, and compassion is always followed by the fear that Ian is still there, still influencing, still poisoning, still steering. Mariah doesn't need to be painted as a villain for the story to remain horrifying. The horror lies in the fact that she may be a victim of manipulation, yet the consequences are brutally real. Her severe psychological instability makes her fertile ground for the toxic ideas Ian plants, advice wrapped in a false sense of reason that convinces Mariah she is doing what's right, what's necessary. When a mind is twisted that deeply, truth stops being obvious. It becomes something replaceable, overwritten by the narrative the manipulator wants the victim to believe. And that reality pushes Tessa closer to despair, because she understands that love alone can't repair a break this deep if the darkness is still breathing beside them. At the same time, Abby and Devon can't remain in pure grief. Their pain is forced to mutate when the investigation confirms Dominic was pulled into a deliberate revenge plot. Abby, already on the brink of collapse, is shoved into a rage with nowhere to go. The mother in her refuses to accept that her child was used, weaponized, reduced to a tool for someone else's agenda. She may be breaking, but she is breaking with the awareness that the person who did this calculated it, and that knowledge turns grief into a distorted kind of determination if she fully gives up. She hands Ian a total victory. Devon is torn between two forces: an urge to destroy everything connected to Ian, and a fear that if he lets emotion lead, he will do exactly what Ian wants: self-destruct. Devon knows revenge thrives on unstable victims because they make mistakes. But understanding that doesn't erase feeling. Dominic is gone, and that fact can't be managed like a contract or a business deal. It is a living wound. As the pieces regarding that powerful family become clearer, the atmosphere in Genoa City changes color. The city begins breathing through suspicion, through scanning eyes, through a sense that an invisible war is igniting beneath the surface of country clubs, polished gatherings, and polite handshakes. Dominic's death and the truth about Ian become a haunting presence, not only because it hurts, but because it awakens a larger fear. If a child can be turned into a pawn, what line still exists? People begin to wonder what other secrets are buried, what debts are waiting to be collected in the cruelest courtesy. And within that collective dread, Abby and Devon carry not only mourning, but the unbearable role of living proof that Ian Ward is not a finished story. He is a danger still in motion. Someone with a past dark enough to force the present to pay. A confrontation with Ian Ward therefore becomes unavoidable. It doesn't need to be announced with speeches. It hangs like fate in the air. Tessa feels it in every moment she tries to keep Mariah from sinking further while facing the possibility that Ian is closer than anyone wants to admit. Abby feels it through the collision of collapse and fury, to opposing waves smashing every fragile support inside her. Devon feels it in a silence heavy as steel, when he begins to understand that if they don't face this, they will remain victims forever. And Burrow, even as a figure mostly defined by the investigation, becomes the cold axis holding everything back from total chaos. The case is homicide. Ian is the center. The larger target is emerging, and time is the one weapon Ian has always known how to use. In the end, Dominic's death doesn't only end a life. It leaves a scar as deep as a crack in the foundation of multiple families. Abby and Devon will never return to who they were before, because some losses aren't the kind time heals. They are the kind where time only teaches you how to live beside the wound. Tessa will be changed too, because once you witness love weaponized for manipulation, you can't love the same way again. You carry a permanent alarm inside your heart. A constant question of whether the person you love is truly present or being pulled away by a shadow you cannot see. And Genoa City, for its part, will have to live with the truth that Ian Ward isn't a nightmare from the past. He is an active threat, a man whose darkness runs deep enough to make the present bleed. And speaking personally, there's something about this story that chills me more than twists or shock reveals. The helplessness of watching an innocent child become the fuse for an adult's revenge. Dominic's tragedy isn't only painful because he died, it's painful because someone else tried to claim the meaning of his death for their own agenda. I've always wanted to believe that in the world of Y&R, people can survive anything: betrayal, power struggles, moral collapse, yet there are still unspoken lines that a civilized town won't cross. Here, that line has been crushed. And that is what makes the tension feel so thick you can barely breathe, not because we fear the story will get worse, but because we begin to realize it absolutely can. Because as the secret of Ian's connection to that powerful family sharpens into focus, the most terrifying question isn't only who the truth will destroy, it's when Ian will strike again. Dominic was an unconscious pawn, so who becomes the next pawn when Ian needs a new blow to complete his revenge? And while Abby is still trapped between collapse and hatred, while Devon stands between grief and determination, while Tessa fights to keep Mariah from the edge. The coldest forecast hovering over Genoa City is unmistakable. The confrontation isn't merely coming, it's coming on Ian's chosen timeline. And once he chooses the moment, it may already be too late for anyone to shield themselves from the next devastating move.